The red dust of Kepler 442 be swirled around Marine Corporal Jake Martinez as he checked his rifle for the third time that morning. The mining planet always felt hostile to him, with its thin atmosphere and strange purple sky that never seemed quite right. He had been stationed here for 8 months now, protecting the mining operations from whatever dangers this alien world might throw at them. Jake walked along the perimeter fence, his boots crunching on the rocky ground. The mining facility behind him hummed with activity as giant machines dug deeper into the planet's crust, searching for rare metals that Earth desperately needed. Most of the Marines complained about this assignment, calling it boring guard duty. On a dead rock, Jake didn't mind the quiet, though. It beat the war zones he had served in before. His patrol route took him toward the Canyonlands, where the company had forbidden anyone to go. The corporate bosses said it was too dangerous, full of unstable rock formations and deep crevices that could swallow a man whole. Jake had heard other stories, though. The miners whispered about creatures that lived in those canyons, predators that hunted in packs and could tear a man apart in seconds. As Jake reached the edge of the forbidden zone, he noticed something strange. The ground was covered with tracks, but not the kind made by the usual small creatures that scurried around the mining site. These tracks were large, with deep claw marks that suggested something heavy and powerful had passed this way recently. The tracks led deeper into the canyon, disappearing into the shadows between the red rock walls. Jake knew he should report this to his sergeant and turn back. Protocol was clear about staying within the safe zone, but something about those tracks made him curious. They looked desperate somehow, not the confident stride of a successful hunter, but the scattered, urgent marks of something searching frantically for food. He followed the tracks for about a mile, his weapon ready and his senses alert for any sign of danger. The canyon walls rose higher around him, blocking out much of the purple sky and creating an eerie twilight even though it was still morning. Strange sounds echoed off the rocks, clicking and chittering noises that Jake couldn't identify. Then he saw them, 8 creatures crouched around what looked like the remains of some small animal. They were unlike anything Jake had ever seen before, even in all his travels across the galaxy. Each one was about the size of a large wolf, but their bodies were sleeker and more muscular. Their skin was covered in dark scales that shifted color slightly as they moved, like oil on water. Most striking were their heads, which combined the features of a reptile and a mammal in ways that should have been impossible. The creatures had noticed Jake too. 8 pairs of bright yellow eyes turned toward him, and the pack slowly spread out in what was clearly a hunting formation. Jake raised his rifle but didn't fire. Something about their appearance stopped him. These weren't the fierce predators he had expected to find. They looked thin, almost skeletal, with their ribs showing through their scaled skin. Their eyes held hunger and desperation rather than aggression, the largest of the creatures. Clearly, the pack leader took a step toward Jake. It was bigger than the others, with scars across its snout and a more confident posture despite its obvious starvation. Jake could see intelligence in its yellow eyes, a calculating look that suggested this wasn't just a simple animal acting on instinct. Jake kept his rifle trained on the pack leader but made no aggressive moves. He had learned in his years of military service that sometimes the best action was no action at all. The creatures seemed uncertain about what to do with him. They were clearly predators, built for hunting and killing, but they were also weak. From hunger and facing an armed human who showed no fear, minutes passed in tense silence. Jake noticed that the smallest of the creatures, barely larger than a house cat, was struggling to stay upright. Its legs shook with weakness, and it kept swaying as if it might collapse at any moment. This had to be a juvenile, probably born. After whatever disaster had reduced their food supply, the young one suddenly fell to the ground with a soft thud. The other creatures turned toward it with obvious concern, making low, whistling sounds that seemed to be some form of communication. The pack leader looked back at Jake, then at the fallen juvenile, then at Jake again. There was something almost pleading in its expression. Jake made a decision that went against every bit of military training he had ever received. He slowly lowered his rifle and reached into his pack. The adult creatures tensed, ready to attack if he pulled out a weapon. But Jake withdrew something else entirely. Emergency ration bars, the high-protein food supplements that every Marine carried for survival situations. He unwrapped one of the bars and held it up so the creatures could see it. Their nostrils flared as they caught the scent of food, and Jake could see their hunger intensify. Moving very slowly and carefully, he placed the food bar on the ground about halfway between himself and the pack. The creatures stared at the food, then at Jake, clearly confused by this behavior. In their world, prey animals didn't offer food to predators. This was something outside their understanding of how the universe worked. Jake backed away several steps, keeping his hands visible and his movements calm. He spoke in a quiet, gentle voice, the same tone he had used with frightened children in war zones. "It's okay," he said, knowing they couldn't understand his words but hoping they might understand his tone. "I'm not going to hurt you." The pack leader approached the food bar cautiously, sniffing at it from a safe distance. After a long moment, it grabbed the bar and carried it back to the fallen juvenile. The young creature managed to lift its head and began eating with obvious relief. Jake placed 2 more food bars on the ground, then slowly backed away toward the canyon entrance. The adult creatures watched him go but made no move to follow. As he reached the mouth of the canyon, Jake looked back one more time. The pack was sharing the food among all its members, with the adults making sure the juvenile got more than its fair share, walking back toward the mining facility. Jake wondered what he had just started. He had broken about a dozen regulations. By entering the forbidden zone and making contact with potentially dangerous wildlife, his sergeant would probably have him court-martialed if he found out. But something about those desperate, hungry creatures had reached him in a way he couldn't explain. The red dust swirled around his boots as Jake made his way home, already planning how he might get more food bars without anyone noticing. Jake returned to the canyon the next morning with 6 food bars hidden in his pack. He had spent most of the night thinking about those yellow eyes and the way the pack leader had looked at him with something that seemed almost like gratitude. His fellow Marines would call him crazy for going back, but Jake couldn't shake the image of that young creature collapsing from hunger. The sun was still low in the purple sky when Jake reached the spot where he had encountered the pack yesterday. The creatures were there waiting for him, crouched among the rocks about 50 feet away. They looked wary but not hostile, watching his every movement with those bright, intelligent eyes. Jake noticed that the juvenile who had collapsed was now standing, though it still looked weak and unsteady. The food he had provided yesterday had clearly helped, but it was obvious that these creatures needed much more than 3 protein bars to recover from whatever had brought them to the edge of starvation. Moving slowly and deliberately, Jake placed 3 food bars on the ground in the same spot as before. The pack leader, the large scarred creature he had faced yesterday, approached more confidently this time. It sniffed the food carefully, then looked directly at Jake with what seemed like recognition. Jake backed away to give them space, but this time he didn't leave immediately. He found a large rock about 30 yards away and sat down to watch. The creatures shared the food among themselves again, but Jake noticed something interesting about their behavior. The adults ate very little, making sure the younger pack members got the majority of the food. It was clear that these weren't just mindless predators, but caring family members who put their young first even when they were starving. Over the next several days, Jake established a routine. He would arrive at the canyon each morning with food, place it on the ground, and then retreat to his watching spot on the rock. The creatures began to expect him, gathering at the feeding spot before he even arrived. They seemed to understand that he came in peace, and their initial fear gradually gave way to cautious acceptance. By the end of the first week, Jake was spending his entire lunch break in the canyon. He brought whatever food he could spare from his own rations, and even started buying extra supplies from the facility's commissary with his own credits. When other Marines asked why he was eating less at meals, Jake made excuses about watching his weight or not feeling hungry. Sergeant Lisa Parker noticed Jake's changed behavior but didn't say anything at first. Marines often developed odd habits. on long deployments, and as long as Jake did his job properly, she was willing to overlook minor peculiarities. But when she spotted Jake heading toward the Forbidden Zone during his off-duty hours, she decided to investigate. Lisa followed Jake to the canyon entrance and watched in amazement as he fed the pack of alien predators. She had heard rumors about dangerous creatures living in the canyonlands, but these animals seemed almost domesticated around Jake. They waited patiently for their food and showed no aggression toward the human who had been caring for them. Martinez, what the hell do you think you're doing? Lisa called out as Jake returned from the feeding spot. Jake froze, knowing he was caught red-handed breaking multiple regulations. I can explain, Sergeant, he said, though he wasn't sure how to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. You better have a damn good explanation for consorting with hostile wildlife, Lisa said, but her tone was more curious than angry. She had seen the way the creatures behaved around Jake, and it was clear that whatever was happening here was not standard predator-prey behavior. Jake told her everything, from his first encounter with the starving pack to his daily feeding routine. He explained how the creatures seemed to recognize him now, how they showed no aggression, despite being natural predators, and how they clearly cared for their young and each other. Lisa listened to the whole story with growing amazement. In her 15 years of military service, she had never heard of anything like this happening between humans and alien wildlife. These are the same creatures that the mining bosses warned us about? She asked. The ones that supposedly attack. Anything that moves? They were starving, Jake said simply. They're not aggressive anymore because they're not desperate anymore. Lisa made Jake promise not to continue the feeding routine until she could figure out what to do about the situation. But the next morning, she found herself following Jake to the canyon with her own contribution of food bars. She wanted to see these creatures for herself and try to understand what had created this impossible bond between predator and prey. The pack seemed nervous about Lisa's presence at first, but they quickly realized that she was with Jake and posed no threat. Lisa watched in fascination as the creatures interacted with each other and with Jake. They had a complex social structure, with clear hierarchies and communication patterns. The way they looked at Jake suggested they saw him as something unique, neither prey nor threat, but something entirely new in their experience. Over the following weeks, other Marines began to learn about Jake's secret feeding program. Most of them thought he was insane for trusting alien predators, but a few became curious enough to join the morning feeding sessions. The pack gradually became accustomed to seeing multiple humans, though they remained most comfortable around Jake. Dr. Amanda Cole, the facility's xenobiologist, became interested in the situation when she heard Marines talking about the tame predators in the canyon. She convinced Lisa to let her observe one of the feeding sessions, and what she saw changed her entire understanding of the planet's ecosystem. The creatures Jake had been feeding were Vorthek, a species that Amanda had been trying to study since arriving on Kepler 442b 6 months earlier. In all her research, she had never been able to observe them up close because they were notoriously elusive and dangerous. The mining operations had disrupted their territory and driven away their natural prey, pushing them to the edge of extinction. Amanda began documenting the interactions between Jake and the Vorthek pack, taking careful notes about their behavior patterns and social structure. She discovered that the creatures had a rudimentary form of telepathic communication within their pack bonds, and remarkably, they seemed to be developing some kind of emotional connection with Jake, the pack leader, whom Jake had started calling Scareth after the scars on its snout showed particular intelligence in its interactions with humans. It seemed to understand that Jake was different from other humans, and it began to show protective behavior when new people approached the feeding area. The Vorthek pack grew stronger and healthier on their steady diet of human food supplements. They began to venture closer to the mining facility. Workers reported seeing the creatures watching them from a distance, but there were no hostile encounters. The pack seemed to understand that the humans at the facility were connected to Jake and therefore under some kind of protection. This development worried Director Greg Stevens, the facility administrator, who saw the presence of predators near his operation as a serious liability. But Amanda's research was providing valuable scientific data, and there had been no attacks or threats from the creatures. For now, he was willing to let the unusual situation continue under careful observation. 3 weeks after Jake first encountered the starving pack, something extraordinary began to happen. The Vorthic creatures started following his regular patrol routes at a distance, moving through the canyon lands parallel to the perimeter fence. They never came close enough to alarm the other guards, but Jake could always sense their presence watching from the rocky outcrops and shadowed crevices. Scareth, the pack leader, seemed particularly interested in Jake's daily activities. The large scarred creature would position itself on high ledges where it could observe the humans' movements throughout the day. When Jake looked up and spotted the Vorthic watching him, Scareth would tilt its head in what almost looked like a greeting before disappearing back into the rocks. Dr. Amanda Cole had been spending more time at the feeding site, taking detailed measurements and observations of the pack's behavior. She noticed that the creatures had developed distinct responses to different humans. While they tolerated Lisa and the other Marines who occasionally joined the feeding sessions, their body language around Jake was completely different. Their posture was more relaxed, their movements more confident, and they made soft chirping sounds that Amanda had never heard them make around anyone else. "It's unprecedented," Amanda told Jake one morning after a particularly interesting observation session. "They've essentially adopted you into their social structure. Look at how they position themselves when you're here versus when other humans are present." Jake watched as Scareth approached the feeding area with 3 other adult Vorthic trailing behind. When the pack leader saw Jake, it made a low rumbling sound that seemed to be directed specifically at him. The other creatures responded with their own vocalizations, creating what sounded almost like a conversation. "They're talking about you," Amanda said excitedly. That rumble from Scareth translates roughly to recognition or acknowledgement in their social context. The responses from the others suggest agreement or acceptance. "Jake, I think they consider you part of their pack." This revelation fascinated Jake but also worried him. He had started this feeding routine simply to help starving animals, but now it seemed he had stumbled into something much more complex. The Vorthic were clearly intelligent creatures with their own social rules and expectations, and Jake wasn't sure what responsibilities came with being accepted into their family structure. His concerns proved justified when the pack began displaying protective behavior toward the mining facility. Workers reported seeing Vorthic creatures patrolling the outer perimeter at night, moving through areas where security cameras couldn't reach them. At first, this caused panic among the facility staff, but no attacks occurred. Instead, the creatures seemed to be acting as additional guards, watching for threats from the outside. The real test came when a group of tunnel worms broke through the foundation of one of the storage buildings. These destructive parasites had been a constant problem for the mining operation, boring through equipment and structural supports with their acid secretions. The facility's pest control measures had been largely ineffective against the rapidly multiplying creatures. Jake was on duty when the alarm sounded about the tunnel worm infestation in Building C. He grabbed his equipment and headed toward the emergency, but as he rounded the corner of the building, he found something unexpected. 5 members of the Vorthic pack were already there, systematically hunting down and killing the tunnel worms with efficient precision. Scareth looked up from a freshly killed worm and made that same rumbling sound he used to greet Jake. The other pack members continued their hunt, their natural predatory instincts perfectly suited for dealing with the parasitic creatures that human technology struggled to eliminate. Within an hour, the Vorthic had cleared out the entire infestation. They left the dead tunnel worms in neat piles near the building entrance, almost as if they were presenting their kills to the humans as gifts. Then they retreated back to the Canyonlands, leaving behind a facility staff that was both amazed and confused by what they had witnessed. Director Greg Stevens called an emergency meeting that afternoon to discuss what everyone was calling the Predator incident. Most of the facility's management staff wanted to report the Vorthic presence to corporate headquarters and request immediate extermination protocols. But Amanda presented a different perspective based on her research findings. These creatures aren't threatening our operation, she argued. They're protecting it. They've identified our facility as part of their territory now, which means they have a vested interest in keeping it safe from real threats like tunnel worms and other pests. Jake found himself in the unusual position of defending alien predators. To his own superiors, he explained how the pack had come to trust humans after months of careful interaction, and how their presence actually made the facility safer rather than more dangerous. They're not pets, Jake emphasized. They're intelligent beings who have chosen to form an alliance with us. If we treat them with respect, they'll continue to help us. But if we betray their trust, we'll turn helpful allies into dangerous enemies. Director Stevens was skeptical but couldn't argue with the results. The tunnel worm problem that had cost the company thousands of credits in damage and pest control measures had been solved in a single afternoon by the Vorthak pack. From a purely business perspective, the creatures were proving to be valuable assets rather than liabilities. Amanda's research revealed more fascinating details about the pack's cognitive abilities. She discovered that the Vorthak had a form of collective memory, sharing experiences and knowledge through their telepathic bonds. When one member of the pack learned something new, that information was quickly distributed to the entire group. This meant that the pack's acceptance of Jake had been a group decision based on shared experiences and collective evaluation of his character. They had tested him over weeks of interaction, observing his behavior and intentions before deciding to trust him. The fact that they had extended this trust to other humans associated with Jake suggested a sophisticated understanding of social relationships and group dynamics. The most remarkable development came when Jake was patrolling near the canyon entrance one evening and felt a strange tingling sensation in his mind. For just a moment, he experienced what seemed like an emotional echo from the Vorthak pack, a sense of contentment and safety that wasn't his own. Amanda theorized that Jake was somehow tapping into the pack's telepathic network, though she couldn't explain how this was possible between different species. As the weeks passed, the relationship between humans and Vorthak continued to evolve. The pack began venturing closer to the facility during daylight hours, and some of the braver miners started leaving food scraps for them. The creatures showed remarkable intelligence in distinguishing between different humans, displaying trust toward those who showed them kindness while remaining wary of anyone who seemed hostile or afraid. Jake realized that his simple act of feeding starving animals had grown into something unprecedented in human history. He had helped bridge the gap between two intelligent species, creating the foundation for what might become the first true interspecies alliance. But he also knew that this fragile relationship would face serious challenges as word of the situation inevitably reached corporate headquarters on Earth. The peace that had settled over the mining facility was shattered when a corporate transport ship landed on the main pad, 3 months after Jake first encountered the Vorthak pack. Captain Rick Hayes stepped off the ship with a team of 12 heavily armed security specialists, all wearing the black uniforms of Terran Corporate Solutions, the company's private military division. Jake watched from his guard post as the corporate team unloaded advanced scanning equipment and what looked like hunting gear designed for tracking large predators. His stomach dropped when he saw Director Stevens hurrying across the landing pad to greet Captain Hayes with obvious nervousness. "Corporate got wind of our predator situation," Sergeant Lisa Parker told Jake quietly as they observed the new arrivals. Stevens had to file a report when the tunnel worm incident made it into the official logs. Apparently, headquarters doesn't like the idea of uncontrolled alien wildlife near their mining operations. Jake felt a cold dread settling in his chest. He had known this day would come eventually, but he had hoped for more time to prove that the Vorthak pack was helping rather than threatening the facility. Now it looked like corporate had already made up their minds about what needed to happen. Captain Hayes called a facility-wide meeting that evening in the main assembly hall. He was a tall man with cold gray eyes and the kind of military bearing that suggested he had seen action in the corporate wars on the Outer Rim. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who was used to being obeyed without question. I've been sent here to assess and eliminate a predator threat that has been allowed to develop around this facility, Hayes announced. My team has orders to hunt down and destroy all hostile wildlife in the area to ensure worker safety and operational security. Jake stood up from his seat in the back of the hall. Sir, with respect, these creatures aren't hostile. They've actually been helping us by controlling pest problems and providing perimeter security. Hayes turned his cold gaze toward Jake. Are you Corporal Martinez? The Marine who's been feeding these animals against direct regulations. Yes, sir, but I need to explain the situation, Jake began, but Hayes cut him off with a sharp gesture. There's nothing to explain, Corporal. You've been fraternizing with dangerous alien predators, endangering this entire facility and everyone in it. My team will begin hunting operations tomorrow morning, and these creatures will be eliminated before they have a chance to turn on the humans who've been foolish enough to trust them. Dr. Amanda Cole tried to intervene with her research data, explaining how the Vorthik had demonstrated intelligence and cooperative behavior. But Hayes dismissed her findings as the naive observations of a scientist who didn't understand military realities. Predators are predators, Hayes said firmly. They might seem friendly when they're being fed, but the moment food becomes scarce or they perceive humans as threats, they'll revert to their natural killing instincts. I've seen it happen on a dozen worlds, and I won't let it happen here. Jake felt sick as he watched Hayes outline his extermination plan. The captain had brought sonic trackers that could locate the Vorthik Pack's den, along with weapons designed specifically for hunting large alien predators. He expected the entire operation to be completed within 48 hours. That night, Jake slipped out of the facility and made his way to the Canyonlands. He found Scareth and 3 other pack members at their usual gathering spot, and even in the dim starlight he could see that the creatures seemed agitated. Their enhanced senses had probably detected the arrival of the corporate hunting team and the dangerous equipment they had brought with them. Jake tried to warn them somehow, using hand gestures and tone of voice to communicate that danger was coming. Scareth seemed to understand, making low, growling sounds and positioning himself protectively in front of the other pack members. But Jake knew that understanding the threat wouldn't be enough to save them from Hayes and his professional hunters. The next morning, Jake volunteered to guide Hayes and his team into the Canyonlands, claiming that his familiarity with the terrain would help them locate the predators more quickly. In reality, he hoped to find some way to protect the pack, or at least give them a chance to escape, but Hayes was too experienced to be fooled by Jake's attempt at misdirection. He had already used the sonic trackers to locate the Vorthik den deep in the canyon system, and his team moved toward their target with military precision. The situation became even worse when the mining operations that morning caused a section of the canyon wall to collapse. The blasting had been scheduled weeks in advance, but no one had realized that the Vorthik den was located directly beneath the area being excavated. The cave-in trapped several pack members underground, including Scareth and 2 of the juveniles. Jake could hear the trapped creatures calling out from beneath the rubble, their distressed vocalizations echoing through the canyon. The pack members who hadn't been caught in the collapse were frantically trying to dig through the debris, but the rocks were too heavy for them to move. Captain Hayes saw this as a perfect opportunity to eliminate the entire pack. The cave-in did half our work for us, he told his team. We'll seal off any escape routes and gas the survivors out. Then we can finish off the trapped ones at our leisure. You can't do that, Jake said desperately. They're intelligent beings, not just animals. This would be murder. They're dangerous predators, and I have orders to eliminate them, Hayes replied coldly. Your emotional attachment to these creatures is clouding your judgment, Corporal. Jake made a decision that would end his military career and possibly his freedom. He drew his sidearm and pointed it at Captain Hayes. I won't let you commit genocide against beings who've shown us nothing but friendship and cooperation. The standoff lasted only seconds before Hayes' security team surrounded Jake with their weapons drawn. But those few seconds were enough for Sergeant Lisa Parker and Dr. Amanda Cole to reach the scene with emergency rescue equipment they had brought from the facility. Stand down, all of you, Lisa ordered with the authority of someone who had been leading Marines longer than Hayes had been hunting predators. "We have trapped beings in there who need immediate rescue, regardless of what species they belong." T.O. Amanda had brought geological scanning equipment that could map the cave system and locate pockets where the trapped Vorthak might still be alive. Her scans showed that Scareth and the juveniles were in an air pocket about 20 feet beneath the rubble, but they were running out of oxygen quickly. Jake holstered his weapon and grabbed a shovel from Amanda's equipment. "I'm going to dig them out," he announced. "Anyone who wants to help save lives can join me. Anyone who wants to stand around arguing about corporate policy can get out of the way." To everyone's surprise, several of Hayes' security team members began helping with the rescue effort. Even trained corporate soldiers found it difficult to stand by and watch intelligent beings suffocate when they had the power to help. The rescue operation took 6 hours of careful digging through unstable rocks and twisted metal debris. Jake worked alongside corporate security team members who had initially come to hunt the Vorthak but now found themselves trying to save them. Even Captain Hayes eventually picked up a shovel, though he maintained his grim expression throughout the effort. Dr. Amanda Cole used her geological scanners to guide the rescue team around dangerous areas where the cave system might collapse. Further, the Free Pack members worked alongside the humans, their powerful claws helping to move smaller rocks that the humans couldn't handle easily. It was the first time that both species had cooperated on such a scale, working together toward a common goal. When they finally broke through to the air pocket where Scareth and the juveniles were trapped, Jake was the first to crawl through the narrow opening. He found the pack leader barely conscious, his breathing shallow and labored from the thin air. The two juveniles were huddled against Scareth's warm body, weak but still alive. Jake had expected the trapped Vorthak to panic when they saw him in their confined space, but instead Scareth looked up at him with what seemed like relief. The pack leader made a soft rumbling sound, the same greeting he had used during their peaceful encounters at the feeding site. Even in his weakened state, Scareth seemed to understand that Jake was there to help. The extraction process was delicate and dangerous. The trapped Vorthak had to be sedated with veterinary drugs that Amanda had brought from the facility's medical supplies, then carefully lifted through the narrow rescue tunnel. Jake stayed with each creature during the extraction, talking to them in calm tones and keeping physical contact to reassure them that they were safe. Captain Hayes watched the entire rescue operation with growing amazement. He had expected the Vorthak to attack their rescuers the moment they were freed, reverting to their predatory instincts when faced with stress and confinement. Instead, the creatures seemed to understand that the humans were helping them, and they cooperated with the rescue efforts even when they were frightened and disoriented. When Scareth was finally brought to the surface, the pack leader was too weak to stand on his own. Jake knelt beside the large creature and placed his hand on Scareth's scarred head, speaking softly to him as he had done so many times during their feeding sessions. The other pack members gathered around their leader, making concerned chirping sounds and nuzzling him gently with their snouts. Dr. Amanda Cole immediately began treating the rescued Vorthak for oxygen deprivation and minor injuries from falling rocks. She worked with the efficiency of someone who had dealt with medical emergencies before, but she was also careful to explain each procedure to the conscious pack members, as if they could understand her intentions. The most remarkable moment came when Jake was helping to carry one of the juveniles to a shaded area where Amanda could examine it more thoroughly. The young Vorthak, barely larger than a house cat, looked up at Jake with its bright yellow eyes and made a sound that was almost like a purr. Then it reached out with one small clawed paw and gently touched Jake's face, a gesture that seemed unmistakably affectionate. Several of Captain Hayes' security team members witnessed this interaction, and Jake could see their attitudes changing in real time. These were hardened soldiers who had been trained to see alien life forms as potential threats, but watching a young creature show gratitude to its human rescuer challenged their preconceptions about predator and prey relationships. Captain Hayes called Jake aside while Amanda continued treating the rescued Vorthak. I came here with orders to eliminate a predator threat, he said quietly. But what I've seen today suggests that the real threat would be destroying these creatures, not protecting them. Jake looked at the captain with surprise. You're not going to hunt them anymore? How can I hunt beings who showed such trust and cooperation during a life-threatening emergency? Hayes replied, My team and I have been doing this work for 15 years, and we've never seen anything like what happened here today. These aren't mindless predators, Martinez. They're people, just not human people. Hayes made his official report to corporate headquarters that evening, but instead of recommending extermination protocols, he filed a request for xenobiological research support and interspecies cooperation guidelines. His report detailed the intelligence and cooperative nature of the Vorthak pack, emphasizing their value as allies rather than their danger as predators. The response from Earth came 3 days later in the form of a message from the Colonial Development Authority's Xenobiology Department. They were sending a full research team to study the human-Vorthak relationship and develop protocols for similar situations on other worlds. Instead of being punished for his unauthorized contact with alien wildlife, Jake was being reassigned as the facility's first interspecies liaison officer. Dr. Amanda Cole was promoted to head of xenobiological research for the entire Kepler 442b operation, with a mandate to study and document the Vorthak culture and social structure. Her initial reports were already causing excitement among scientists on Earth who had never seen such clear evidence of successful cooperation between humans and alien predators. The Vorthak pack made a full recovery from their rescue ordeal within 2 weeks. Scarrett's injuries healed completely, and the juveniles showed no lasting effects from their underground imprisonment. But the experience had changed the pack's relationship with the human facility in fundamental ways. The pack began spending more time near the mining operation, not as distant watchers but as active participants in the facility's security. They patrolled the perimeter at night, eliminated pest infestations with ruthless efficiency, and even learned to distinguish between authorized personnel and potential intruders. Several times, the pack alerted human guards to equipment malfunctions or structural problems that might have caused serious accidents. Jake's daily feeding sessions evolved into something more like family gatherings. The pack would arrive at the designated spot not just for food but for social interaction with their adopted human pack member. Jake learned to understand their body language and vocalizations. While the Vorthak seemed to pick up on human emotional states and behavioral cues, the most profound change came when Jake realized that his telepathic connection with the pack had strengthened during the rescue operation. He could now sense their general emotional states and even receive simple concepts or images through their shared mental link. Amanda theorized that the intense stress and cooperation of the rescue had somehow deepened the bond between Jake and the pack's collective consciousness. 3 months after the rescue operation, Jake sat on his usual rock in the Canyonlands, sharing his lunch with 8 healthy Vorthak pack members. The juveniles had grown larger and more confident, while the adults had developed a comfortable routine of cooperation with their human neighbors. Scarrett approached Jake with something in his mouth, dropping it carefully at the human's feet, before stepping back with what looked almost like a shy expression. It was a piece of rare crystal, the same type that the mining operation extracted from deep underground. The pack leader had brought Jake a gift, something valuable from their territory, to show appreciation for everything he had done. As Jake picked up the crystal and thanked Scarrett in the mixture of human words and Vorthak sounds they had developed as a common language, he realized that his simple act of sharing food with starving creatures had grown into something unprecedented in galactic history. Humans and Vorthak were no longer separate species competing for resources, but members of an extended pack that included both predator and prey. The message that Dr. Amanda Cole sent to Earth that evening would be studied by xenobiologists and diplomats for generations to come. It concluded with a simple statement that captured the essence of what had happened on Kepler 442b. We have discovered that the most dangerous predators in the galaxy can become the most loyal family members. If we have the courage to share our food and the wisdom to share our trust,